August 19th, 1940, 07:13. Obergefreiter Hans Müller's hands were covered in oil. 600 kilometers south of RAF Kenley Air Base, in Pas-de-Calais. In a small Luftwaffe maintenance hangar, he was looking inside a Messerschmitt Bf 109's engine. The engine was leaking oil. A small leak. Seemed insignificant. But Hans knew. Small problems became big problems in the sky. Hans was 26 years old. Before the war, he had worked at the BMW factory. He was an engine master. He loved German engineering, precision, quality, excellence. When he was called up in September 1939, the Luftwaffe assigned him as a mechanic. 3 months training, then France, then war. Now he was on JG-26's maintenance crew. 12 Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighter planes. Maintenance every day. Check every day. Repair every day. Because every day pilots were flying over England. And every day some weren't coming back. Hans checked the engine's oil line. Found the leak point. The gasket was worn. It needed to be replaced. But there was a problem. There were no spare parts. Before we begin the story, please hit the like button. It helps us reach more people with these forgotten stories. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. On the Germany at War channel, we tell the real stories of the war from the German side. And leave a comment. Tell us where you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. August 1940. The most intense period of the Battle of Britain. The Luftwaffe was sending hundreds of planes every day, bombing England, hitting RAF air bases, destroying radar stations. The goal was simple: destroy the RAF, take air superiority. Then Operation Celian, invade England. But the RAF was resisting. Spitfires, Hurricanes, clashing with Messerschmitts in the sky every day. And the Luftwaffe was taking losses. Every day 10-20 planes were going down. Some were being shot down by the RAF. Some were falling due to mechanical failure. Some were crashing into the English Channel. In Hans's unit, there were 12 Messerschmitt Bf 109s, but only 8 were airworthy. 4 were in maintenance, waiting for parts. The problem was simple. Spare parts were insufficient. Germany had increased war production. Yes, but production was focused on new aircraft. Spare parts were secondary. An engine gasket, a simple thing. Worth 10 Pfennig, but there wasn't any. A fuel pump gear, small metal part, wasn't there. A radiator hose, rubber, wasn't there. And pilots were waiting, ready to fly. But planes weren't ready. Hans's commander, Oberleutnant Werner Schmidt, came to the hangar. "Müller, when will this plane be ready?" Hans turned his head. "Need spare parts, sir. Maybe comes in 2 days." Werner looked angrily. "In 2 days? Tomorrow morning this plane will fly. No other option." "But Herr Oberleutnant—" "No other option," Werner repeated. "Fix it. Do whatever you have to do. But tomorrow morning this plane will be ready." Then he turned. Left. Hans looked at the engine. Oil was leaking. The gasket was worn. There were no spare parts. But there was an idea. Hans went outside. Other mechanics in the hangar were working. Engines were being disassembled. Wings were being repaired. Radios were being tested. "Erich," he called out. Erich Bauer was another mechanic, his best friend. They had worked together at BMW. Erich came wiping his hands. "What happened?" "Need a gasket for Daimler-Benz DB601 engine. Oil line gasket. Do you have any?" Erich thought. "No, all gaskets are finished. We used the last stock last week." Hans cursed, quietly. "But," said Erich, "maybe we make it ourselves." Hans looked at him. "How do we make it ourselves?" "Need special gasket material. High temperature resistant. Oil-proof." Erich smiled. "Or we use rubber." "Rubber?" "Yes, old rubber. Vehicle tire. We cut it and shape it. Temporary solution. Maybe lasts 20-30 flight hours," Hans thought. It was against standards, against regulations. But these were desperate times. "Try it," he said. 2 hours later, Hans and Erich had installed the custom-made gasket. It had been cut from an old truck tire. Fit perfectly on the engine oil line. Hans started the engine, watched, listened. No leak. It worked, said Eric. Hans looked carefully. For now, but we don't know what happens at high temperature. Only one way. Test flight. The next morning, Lieutenant Friedrich Köhler climbed into the cockpit. He was 23 years old, had flown 34 missions, 7 confirmed kills. He was a good pilot. Hans approached him. Herr Lieutenant, I need to inform you of something. Friedrich turned his head. Yes, Müller? This plane, we made a non-standard repair. Engine gasket. Temporary solution. Not tested. If you don't want to take the risk, Friedrich smiled. Müller, we take risks every day. Spitfires in the sky are trying to kill us. Can your gasket be more dangerous than that? Hans couldn't answer. I trust you, said Friedrich. You know this engine well. If you approved it, I'll fly. He started the engine. The Bf 109's Daimler-Benz engine rumbled. 1,175 horsepower. Propellers spun. He taxied. Went to the runway. Accelerated. Takeoff. Hans watched. The plane climbed. 1,000 meters. 2,000 meters. 4,000 meters. And disappeared. Into the sky. Hans held his breath. Friedrich was flying over the English Channel. Blue water below. English coast ahead. Open sky above. Engines were working perfectly. No vibration. No abnormal sound. Scheisse, he said. Hans's gasket was working. 10 minutes later, the radar operator called on the radio. Attention! British fighters! 2 o'clock direction. 3,000 meters. Friedrich turned his head. On the right side, 3,000 meters away, he saw Spitfires. 3 of them. His heart raced. Attack! He pushed the throttle all the way. The Bf 109 shot forward. Engine at full power. The Spitfires saw him. Scattered. Friedrich followed one. Sight, target, fire. MG-17 machine guns rattled. The Spitfire pulled up. Tried to escape. Friedrich followed it. Hard turn. Negative G-force. Engine maintained power. Second shot. Hit the Spitfire's wing. Smoke came out. The British pilot went into a dive. Escaped. Friedrich turned back. The other Spitfires had also fled. Mission completed. He returned. Landed at Pas-de-Calais. When he got out of the cockpit, Hans was waiting. How was the engine, Herr Lieutenant? Friedrich smiled. Perfect, Müller. Your gasket is more valuable than gold. Hans breathed with relief. But the story didn't end here. End of August, 1940. The Battle of Britain was intensifying. The Luftwaffe was losing more planes every day. The RAF was resilient, and the spare parts crisis was getting worse. In Hans's unit of 12 planes, only 6 could fly. The other 6.2 planes, engine failure, waiting for fuel pump. Plane, radiator damage, no spare radiator. Plane, hydraulic system failure, no spare valve. Planes, various minor problems, no parts, and it wasn't just JG-26. The entire Luftwaffe was facing the same problem. Göring, Luftwaffe commander, was furious. How is this possible? Germany's best planes can't fly because of small parts? But the reality was simple. German war production had focused on new planes. Spare parts were secondary, and now the price was being paid. Hans was thinking of a different solution to the problem. One evening, he talked with Eric. Look, he said, we made a non-standard gasket. It worked, so can we improvise for other parts too? Eric thought. Like what? Fuel pump gear. If there isn't one, we make it ourselves. From scrap metal. Possible, but must be precise. Tolerance very narrow. We can do it. We understand lathe work. We learned at BMW. Eric smiled. Against regulations, but let's try. Hans and Eric set up a secret workshop. Behind the hangar, in an old barracks. Lathe, welding machine, hand tools. They worked at night, after shifts. Nobody knew. First project, fuel pump gear. Hans examined the technical diagram. Gear, 32 teeth, steel material. He found a piece from scrap metal, from an old truck differential. Shaped it on the lathe. Careful, precise. checked each tooth by hand. After 8 hours of work, the gear was ready. The next day, he installed it on a Bf-109, tested it. It worked. Second project, radiator hose. There was no standard hose, but there was a brake hose from an old truck. Hans cut it, shaped it, adapted it. It worked. Third project, hydraulic valve gasket. Again made it from rubber. It worked. By early September, Hans and Eric had made 6 planes airworthy again, only with non-standard parts. Commander Werner Schmidt noticed, "Müller, how did these planes suddenly become ready? Did spare parts arrive?" Hans hesitated. If he told the truth, rule violation. Maybe punishment. Maybe court-martial. But Friedrich intervened. "Herr Oberleutnant, Müller is a master. He created a miracle." Werner looked, then smiled. "I understand. Officially, I don't know. But unofficially, continue, Müller. If you can keep my planes flying, I won't ask." Hans breathed with relief. Mid-September 1940. Mechanics from other staffels began visiting Hans. "I heard you're doing repairs without spare parts." "How?" Hans was cautious at first, but then realized everyone had the same problem. No spare parts. Planes grounded. He shared the knowledge. "Use rubber for gaskets. Old vehicle tire. Cut. Shape. For gears, use scrap metal. Work with lathe. Be careful. Precision is important. For hose, use old truck parts. Adapt. For valve, use copper wire. Bend and shape. Simple but effective." Within a month, all mechanics of JG-26 were using Hans's methods. Within 2 months, all of 2 Jagdgeschwader. Within 3 months, most Luftwaffe units in France. Unofficial, unauthorized, but life-saving. September 15, 1940. Battle of Britain Day. The Luftwaffe's biggest attack. Fi-500 aircraft sorties. Target, London. JG-26 was also participating. 12 Messerschmitt Bf 109s, all airworthy, all with Hans's improvised parts. Friedrich Köhler was the leader. He climbed into the Bf 109's cockpit. Hans did the final check. "Herr Leutnant, be careful. Some parts are not standard, but your engine is strong." Friedrich nodded. "I trust you, Müller." Take off. 12 planes took off. They crossed the English Channel, approached London. The sky was filled with planes. Bf 109s, Bf 110s, Heinkel bombers, Dornier bombers, and the RAF. Spitfires, Hurricanes. Hundreds of them. Chaos began. Friedrich targeted a Hurricane. Fired. Hit. Hurricane fell. Then a Spitfire targeted him. Friedrich maneuvered. Engine worked at full power. Hans's improvised gasket, gear, hose, all performed. Friedrich escaped from the Spitfire, returned to France. 12 planes had taken off. 10 returned. 2 losses. 1 shot down by RAF. 1 fell into the English Channel, engine failure. But 10 planes survived. Hans's parts didn't fail. October 1940. Luftwaffe High Command received a report. Aircraft readiness rate in units in France increased from 50% to 75%. How did it happen? Investigation began. Major Heinz Baer, technical inspector, visited JG-26, met with Werner Schmidt. "How are so many planes airworthy? Spare parts shipment hasn't increased." Werner hesitated, then was honest. "Our mechanics are creative. They improvise." "Improvisation? Against regulations?" "Yes, but it works." Major Baer looked seriously. "Show me." Werner called Hans. Hans took Major Baer to the hangar, showed one of the Bf 109s, opened the engine. "Here, gasket." From rubber. "Here, gear." From scrap metal. "Here, hose." From old truck part. Major Baer examined. Was silent. Hans worried. Maybe punishment would come. Maybe he'd be arrested. But Major Baer smiled. "Excellent," he said. "German creativity, German craftsmanship. This is what will make us win the war." Werner was surprised. "So, it's approved?" "No," said Major Baer. "Officially, it remains against regulations. But unofficially, encourage it. Spread to all Luftwaffe. Teach your mechanics these techniques. Hans held his breath. Not punishment, appreciation. November 1940. Hans became an unofficial instructor. At Luftwaffe Technical School, he taught mechanics. If there's no spare part, create one. But be careful. Safety is more important than everything. The pilot's life is in your hands. Rubber gasket. Use heat-resistant rubber. Test it. No oil leak. Scrap metal gear. Precise workmanship required. Tolerance no more than 0.1 mm. Hose adaptation. Pressure test. Must not burst. More than 100 mechanics were trained. Techniques spread throughout the Luftwaffe. Result? Aircraft readiness rate rose to 80%. The Battle of Britain was lost. The RAF was stronger. Germany couldn't invade England. But Hans's method kept hundreds of planes in the air. Saved hundreds of pilots' lives. June 1941. Operation Barbarossa. Germany attacked the Soviet Union. 3 million soldiers. 3,000 planes. Hans was transferred to JG-52. Eastern Front. Ukraine. New enemy. Soviet Yak-1. LeGG-3. MiG-3. New conditions. Extreme hot summer. Extreme cold winter. Mud, dust, snow. The spare parts crisis was even worse. Supply lines were 2,000 kilometers away. But Hans was ready. He knew the techniques. Improvisation, creativity, survival. Winter 1941-42. Outside Moscow. Engines weren't working. Oil was freezing. Batteries were dying. Hans found the solution. Don't keep engine off at night. A mechanic should start it every hour. 5 minutes. Then turn off. This way engine doesn't freeze. It worked. JG-52's planes could fly. Other units couldn't. Winter 1942-43. Stalingrad. German 6th Army was besieged. 300,000 soldiers. Air bridge was the only hope. Junkers Ju-52 transport planes were carrying supplies. Food, ammunition, medical supplies. But Ju-52s were aging. Engine failures were increasing. Hans was sent to Potomnik Air Base, inside Stalingrad. Mission: keep Ju-52s airworthy. It was an impossible mission. There were no spare parts, no vehicles. Even scrap metal was scarce. But Hans didn't give up. He collected parts from crashed plane wreckage, stole materials from Soviet vehicles, created adhesives. One Ju-52 engine failure. Cylinder head cracked. Standard solution, engine replacement. But no new engine. Hans's solution: welded the crack. Temporary repair. Maybe 10 flight hours. But it was enough. The Ju-52 carried 100 wounded soldiers. Got them out of Stalingrad. Saved lives. By the end of 1945, how many pilots did Hans's techniques save? The exact number isn't known. No official records were kept, because the methods weren't official. But estimates can be made. 1940-1941, JG-26, 12 planes. With Hans's improvisation, average 75% readiness. Would normally be 50%. Every day, 3 more planes flying. That's 1,095 extra sorties per year. One pilot died every 20 sorties, average. So 55 pilots saved. 1941-1943, Eastern Front. JG-52, larger unit. Planes. Hans's techniques spread to entire unit. Similar effect. Estimated 80-plus pilots saved. 1943-1945, training program. Hundreds of mechanics taught. Spread to all Luftwaffe. Effect large but dispersed. Difficult to calculate. Total, 235 to 285 pilots survived because of Hans's work. April 1945. Germany was collapsing. Hans was at an airbase near Prague. JG-52 no longer existed. Had disbanded. Only a few planes remained. No fuel, no ammunition, no spare parts at all. And it didn't matter anymore. The war was lost. May 8, 1945. Germany surrendered. Hans was captured by the Americans, sent to POW camp, interrogated. What did you do in the war? Mechanic. Aircraft repair. Anything else? No, just mechanic. The Americans checked. No war crimes, no Nazi Party membership, just mechanic. Released in September 1945, returned home, Munich. The city was devastated. His family was alive. That was enough. Hans returned to the BMW factory. They hired him again in 1946, but the factory had been destroyed, bombed, being rebuilt. Hans worked on the reconstruction, engine production, but this time, not warplanes, motorcycles, cars. In the 1950s, BMW expanded. Hans became master foreman, taught young people. Precision, quality, German engineering. But he never talked about the war. Erich Bauer, his best friend, had died at Stalingrad. January 1943. The airbase was captured by the Soviets. Erich couldn't escape. Friedrich Köhler, the pilot, was killed in Normandy in 1944, shot down by Spitfire. Werner Schmidt, commander, survived. Became an architect after the war. Hans never contacted them. The past remained in the past. In 1955, he married a woman named Anna. They had met before the war. Finally got married. They had 2 children, Thomas and Greta. Hans didn't tell them about the war. Only once, when Thomas was 16, he asked, "Father, what did you do in the war?" Hans paused, then answered, "I repaired planes, tried to get people home." "Were you successful?" Hans closed his eyes. "Sometimes, not always." Thomas didn't ask more. Hans's story was never told. He received no medal, saw no recognition, didn't enter books, because the work he did wasn't official, wasn't recorded. Luftwaffe technical reports recorded standard repairs, but improvisations, unauthorized modifications, these were never written down. After the war, former Luftwaffe personnel didn't want to talk. There was shame. There was guilt. Germany had lost. The Nazi regime had committed terrible crimes. Nobody wanted to say, "I worked in the Luftwaffe." Hans didn't talk either. In the 1970s, a German historian was researching Luftwaffe maintenance records. JG-26, JG-52, other units, examining aircraft readiness rates. He noticed an anomaly. Fall 1940. JG-26's readiness rate had risen to 75%. But spare parts shipment hadn't increased. How had it happened? The historian researched former personnel, found a few former mechanics. They mentioned Hans. There was Hans Müller. He was like a genius, would create miracles with his hands, would create something from nothing. The historian tried to find Hans. There were 14 Hans Müllers in the Munich phone book. He found the right one. In 1978, Hans was 64 years old, had retired from BMW, was working in his garden. The historian knocked on his door. "Herr Müller, I'm doing research on Luftwaffe history. Can I talk to you?" Hans hesitated. "About what?" "Your work at JG-26 in 1940. Improvisation techniques. You saved pilots' lives." Hans remained silent, then invited him in. They talked for 2 hours. Hans told everything. Gasket, gear, hose, rubber, scrap metal, secret workshop, Erich, Friedrich, Werner, Stalingrad, Prague. The historian took notes. "This is a wonderful story. An article I could write. Maybe a book." Hans nodded. "But don't use my name. Please." "Why?" "Because." Hans paused. "Because I just did my job. Nothing was special. And because that war, that time, I don't want to remember." The historian understood. Didn't use his name. In 1982, he published a small academic article. Title: Unofficial Improvisation Techniques in Luftwaffe Maintenance Units, 1940-1943. He referred to Hans as Mechanic M. 200 people read the article. Then it was forgotten. Today, in 2024, Hans's story is almost unknown. Luftwaffe historians focus on pilots. But mechanics? Forgotten. Yet the reality is, pilots depended on mechanics to be able to fly. The Bf-109 was an excellent plane, but required maintenance. Engine check every 25 flight hours. Major maintenance every 50 hours. Part replacement. Oil change, check. A pilot had to trust his plane, and the plane's reliability depended on the mechanic's skill. Hans Müller was a hero, but nobody knows. He had no medal, no fame, no recognition, only the work he did and the lives he saved. What's interesting is, at the same time, an American mechanic had done something similar. Sergeant James McKenna, P-38 Lightning planes, in the Pacific. Dobodura Air Base. The P-38's control cables had slack. Pilots were noticing it. Plane reacts late. McKenna found a solution: piano wire. Bent it in Z-shape and installed it as cable tensioner. Unauthorized. But it worked. P-38s maneuvered faster. Pilots fought better against Zeros. 100 American pilots survived. McKenna's story was told in 2024. YouTube video. 500,000 views. Hans Müller's story? Never told. Why? Because Hans was on the German side. The losing side. History is written by the winners, and losers are forgotten. But the truth is, on both sides, ordinary people did extraordinary things. McKenna and Müller never met, but solved the same problem, showed the same creativity, showed the same courage. Both were heroes, but only one was remembered. Hans's story asks an ethical question: safety or duty? Hans made unauthorized modifications, used non-standard parts, tried untested methods. If a part failed, the pilot would die, and Hans would be responsible. But what was the alternative? Wait for standard parts, meaning plane stays grounded. Pilot can't fly. Other pilots fly more missions, take more risks, die more. Which is more ethical? Hans made his decision. Duty. Take the risk. But be careful. And most of the time, he succeeded. But sometimes he failed. In 1942, a Jose Hans-made burst during flight. Engine overheated. Pilot made emergency landing. Survived. But plane was damaged. Hans blamed himself. Hose should have been thicker. Should have tested more. But the commander said, "You did your best." There was no alternative. Pilot is alive. That's important. It wasn't easy. But war wasn't easy. When researching Hans's story, there's a problem. No documents. Most Luftwaffe maintenance records were destroyed at the end of the war. Americans and Soviets captured German archives, but not complete. JG-26's 1940 records partially exist. Some flight logs, pilot reports. But maintenance details? Lost. JG-52's 1941-43 records, most gone. Lost on the Eastern Front. Hans's own notes. Never kept any. Why take notes? He would say. I remember anyway. Only evidence, oral history. Former mechanics' memories. But most died. Few remain. In 2010, a German archivist found a former mechanic from JG-26, Hermann Weiss, 92 years old. He interviewed him. Hermann remembered Hans. Hans was like a genius. Would create miracles with his hands. Would create something from nothing. When I saw him, I would hope. If Hans is here, our planes will fly, I would say. Did you see him after the war? No, never saw him. I searched, couldn't find him. Thought maybe he died. Hermann died in 2011. He was the last witness. Now Hans's story is just fragmentary memories, missing documents, estimates. But the story is real. That's certain. Because war isn't won only on the battlefield. It's one in the hangar. It's one in the workshop. It's one at the repair bench. Hans Müller never fired a single bullet, never killed a single enemy. But 100-plus pilots survived because of him. And those pilots did their missions, shut down enemy planes, flew on bombing raids, did reconnaissance. All depended on the work Hans did. History tells of great men: Hitler, Churchill, Roosevelt, Stalin, generals, admirals. But who really makes history? Ordinary people. Like Hans Müller, like James McKenna, like Beatrice Schilling. Names unknown, faces forgotten, but impact lasting. If this story affected you, please hit the like button. Every like helps us reach more people with forgotten stories. Subscribe and turn on notifications. On the Germany at War channel, we tell the real stories of World War II from the German perspective. Does your family have a war story? Share with us in the comments. Thank you for watching. And remember, Hans Müller was just a mechanic, but he saved 100 pilots' lives. His name was forgotten, but his impact is lasting. Sometimes the real heroes are the quietest ones.